Okay, so listeners sent in some really interesting stuff. This open belief. Ever heard of this?
Openbelief.
Never.
Yeah, it's like,
Rings a bell, maybe, but
yeah.
refresh my memory.
Okay, so they're calling themselves an evidence-based religion,
Okay.
which kind of already sounds like,
Yeah, it's like those two things don't.
yeah, like a contradiction.
It's a head scratcher, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can you have evidence for something you have faith in?
Exactly. And we've got a ton of material on this, presentation slides, what looks like a book outline, even some personal notes about someone's like whole spiritual journey.
Wow, they went all in.
Yeah, and it's all centered around this open belief thing. So I guess our deep dive today is to figure out what is this thing? How does it work? Why would anyone be drawn to something like this? What do you think? Where do we even begin with something this different? Well, I guess we should start with the basics. Like, what do they actually believe?
Right, because they use the word religion. So there's got to be some kind of belief system there.
Exactly. And they lay out these 6 major tenets. And get this, they're divided into planet and people,
Okay.
which I thought was interesting. Like, they're acknowledging this connection between, our planet and humanity.
Right, right.
And what struck me is that these tenets are all about action. It's not just about what you believe in your head, it's about what you do in the world.
So it's not just sitting around contemplating the universe.
Not exactly. They actually have this whole thing about gamifying spiritual practice.
Gamifying. Okay, now I'm really curious.
Yeah, so like each month has a different theme, right? And they have all these activities and challenges designed around that theme.
Interesting. So it's like structured engagement.
Exactly. It's not your typical go to a service once a week kind of religion. They're talking about integrating these principles into your everyday life.
So it's like a religion, but also kind of like a self-help group or a social movement.
It's a little bit of both, honestly. But what really sets them apart, maybe the most important thing, is that they have no single leader.
What? No leader?
No prophet, no guru, no central authority figure.
Okay, so if there's no leader, then how do who decides what open belief is all about?
Well, they talk about having a congregational structure.
Congregational meaning?
Like the members have a voice and a vote.
So it's like a democracy of spirituality.
Exactly. They even use that phrase, a democracy of spirituality, which, you don't hear that every day.
So we've got action-oriented tenets, gamified spirituality, no single leader, and a democratic structure. This is already sounding less like a religion and more like, I don't even know what.
I know, right? It's like they took bits and pieces from all these different things, religion, philosophy, social movements, and kind of mashed them together into something totally new.
It's like a spiritual smoothie.
Maybe. But they do seem to be drawing some pretty clear distinctions between themselves and, traditional beliefs, as they call them.
Yeah, they kind of lay out their differences, almost like a comparison chart.
Right, like they're this new, improved version of religion.
Accessible, constantly evolving.
Community-driven, online-based.
Inclusive, empowering.
And, of course, evidence-based.
Then they contrast that with traditional religions, which they present as more
limited access.
based on teachings from thousands of years ago.
Top-down structure, physical religious centers.
And a heavier focus on faith rather than, data.
It's a stark contrast, for sure. But here's the thing. Even though they're kind of challenging those traditional structures, they still seem to acknowledge the importance of some familiar elements, right?
Okay. Like what?
Well, they talk about belief in a higher power, a moral code.
Forms of worship, rituals, the importance of community.
All things we see in traditional religions, but it's how they interpret those elements that gets really interesting, I think.
Okay, so where do we go from here? How do we even begin to unpack this whole evidence-based religion thing?
I think to really understand it, we need to look at some of the specific examples and personal stories they shared, to see how this actually plays out in practice. Because it's one thing to talk about evidence-based faith in theory, but how does it actually work in someone's life,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And luckily, they gave us plenty to work with.
It's like when I first heard about the whole scientific papers as sacred texts thing, I was like, oh, okay, that's different. Most religions, they've got their holy books, right? Passed down through centuries.
Right, ancient scrolls, interpretations, debates, the whole thing.
Exactly. But this is like, let's crack open the latest issue of Nature and see what the universe is telling us.
It's a very different kind of revelation, trading ancient wisdom for
cutting-edge discoveries.
Yeah. And they're not just talking about, like, basic science here.
Yeah.
We're talking cosmology, quantum physics,
Yeah.
neuroscience, like the stuff that's really pushing the boundaries of what we know about reality.
Right. It's like they're saying if you want to understand the divine, you got to look at the universe itself, see how it works.
Yeah, and not just look at it, but, like, really engage with it. They're encouraging their members to actually read these scientific papers, discuss them, even challenge the findings.
It's a very different mindset, isn't it? Not about blind faith, but about
Curiosity.
yes. Like, don't just take our word for it. Go out and explore for yourself.
And that actually reminded me of that story they shared about the founder's childhood. Growing up Catholic, right?
Yeah.
And they asked their priest if, I think it was about the Lord's Prayer.
The Our Father part.
Yes. Like, if that meant everyone was a child of God.
And the priest just laughed it off.
Which, I mean, for a kid who's trying to understand these big concepts.
That's been confusing, to say the least.
Right, like, here's this prayer I'm supposed to believe in, but when I ask a simple question about it,
it gets dismissed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see how that experience, combined with their grandmother's more open approach to spirituality, it kind of shaped their whole view on how religion should operate.
More open to questions, less about dogma.
Right. And that actually makes me think, how do they reconcile this whole emphasis on evidence with the concept of faith? Because those two things seem kind of
at odds.
Yeah.
Well, from what I gathered, they see faith more as a starting point, like a trust in the process.
Yep.
So it's not about throwing out faith entirely. It's more about grounding it in something, I don't know, more concrete.
Viable.
Yeah, something that can stand up to scrutiny. And this is where their whole thing about the unified theory comes in.
Right. It kept mentioning that.
Which is basically their version of a higher power.
Okay. So not a deity in the traditional sense, but
more like an underlying principle, this idea that there's a fundamental truth, a set of laws that governs everything in the universe.
From the smallest particle
to the largest galaxy.
It's a pretty mind-blowing concept when you really think about it. Like, what if the answer to those big why questions?
The meaning of life, the nature of existence.
What if those answers are written into the fabric of the universe itself?
And that by studying the universe, we're actually getting closer to understanding the divine.
It's a very different way of thinking about spirituality. But, I mean, it makes a certain kind of sense, right?
It does. And it highlights their whole thing about bridging the gap between science and spirituality. Because for them, those two things aren't separate. They're intertwined.
Two sides of the same coin, maybe.
Exactly.
But it's not all just heady concepts and theories with these guys. They also talk a lot about the importance of action.
Right.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. It's not enough to just have these beliefs. You have to live them out.
Put them into practice.
Exactly. And they've got this really interesting way of doing that with their community engagement.
You mean with the monthly themes and all that?
Yeah. Like each month they focus on a different theme, right? But it's not just about like meditating on that theme or journaling about it. It's about doing stuff.
Okay, so give me an example. Like, what would they do for, say, Love and Compassion Month?
Well, they might encourage members to volunteer at a local soup kitchen or
organize a clothing drive.
Yeah. Or even just do something nice for a stranger, like small acts of kindness.
So it's about taking that feeling of compassion
and turning it into something real, something tangible.
I like that. Because so often I think we can get caught up in the feeling of something, but we don't actually
do anything about it.
Exactly.
And this focus on action, it extends to all of their tenets. They talk about promoting sustainable living, supporting social justice initiatives.
Even encouraging entrepreneurship as a form of social change.
Right. It's like, how can we use our skills, our resources, our time to make the world a better place?
It's a very proactive approach to spirituality.
Very much so. And they're not just throwing these ideas out there and saying, okay, go figure it out on your own. They're actively providing resources.
Connecting people with opportunities.
Exactly. They want to create a community where people feel supported.
Empowered.
Yes. Empowered to make a difference.
Which, I mean, that's a pretty powerful idea in itself. This idea that we're not just isolated individuals, but part of something.
Bigger.
Yeah. That we can actually work together to create positive change. And that's something I think
we could all use a little more of these days.
Exactly. But I also keep coming back to the practicalities of all of this.
Right, because they're a new religious movement, which means
challenges.
Lots of challenges.
It's like they've got the vision, they've got the passion.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you actually build something like this?
Right. How do you turn these big ideas into a functioning organization?
And not just any organization. Mm-hmm. A religious organization.
Right.
which comes with its own set of...
regulations.
Exactly. Remember they mentioned needing to get recognized by the IRS as a church?
Oh, yeah, that whole thing.
And apparently it's not as simple as just saying, hey, we're a religion now.
There's paperwork.
Forms, guidelines, the whole 9 yards. They need a defined creed, regular services, a clear leadership structure.
Which is interesting because they're so opposed to hierarchy.
Right. So how do you balance that? The need for structure with their commitment to...
grassroots democracy.
Yeah. And that's just the internal stuff. Then you've got the external challenges.
Like what?
Well, for starters, they're going to face skepticism from both sides.
Both sides, meaning?
The religious folks who think they're not religious enough.
Too focused on science, not enough faith.
And then the secular folks who are like, why even call it a religion? Just be a philosophy group or a social movement. Or
Right.
So they're kind of stuck in this middle ground.
Where they might not fully belong to either world.
Which, maybe that's the point. Maybe they're trying to create a new space for people who don't fit neatly into those boxes.
It's a spiritual but not religious crowd.
Maybe. Or maybe even people who are religious but who are.
Looking for something more.
Yeah. Something that speaks to the complexities of the modern world.
And that's where I think things get really interesting. Because if they can pull this off...
if they can make it work...
I think they could have a real impact.
Do you think so?
I do, because they're not afraid to tackle the big issues. They want to end wars, solve climate change, promote social justice.
Those are some lofty goals.
They are, but they understand that it starts with changing how we think.
And how we act.
Exactly. And one of the ways they talk about doing that, remember they kept mentioning radical honesty?
Oh, yeah, that was something else.
Like really put that into practice, both on a personal level.
Being honest with yourself, with others.
Even when it's uncomfortable. And then on an organizational level, too. Transparency in decision-making, open communication.
It's like they're saying, if we're going to build trust...
we have to start with honesty.
Easier said than done, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. It would require a level of self-awareness and vulnerability that, I don't know, most organizations aren't exactly known for.
Right, that's a big ask. But
yeah,
if they can actually pull it off...
it could be transformative, not just for their own community, but maybe...
for the wider world.
Potentially, yeah. Because that kind of honesty, that commitment to transparency, it could be contagious.
It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. And it's not just about being honest with their own members. They're also approaching interfaith dialogue in the same way.
So building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly. They want to find common ground, work together to address the challenges we all face.
Which, I mean, that's going to count for something, right?
It does.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, I think we all want the same things.
Peace, happiness.
A better world for ourselves and our children. And if Openbelief can find a way to tap into that,
to bring people together around those shared values,
then who knows what they might be able to achieve.
It's an exciting thought, isn't it?
It is.
I think even if someone listens to this and they're like, Openbelief isn't for me, I still think it makes you think, you know?
Absolutely. It challenges our preconceived notions about religion, about spirituality, even about the nature of belief itself.
It's a good reminder that there are many paths up the mountain.
And that maybe, just maybe, we can find our way to the top together.
Well said. Well, listeners, we've reached the end of another deep dive. We hope you found this exploration of Openbelief as fascinating as we did. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning,
and keep searching for your own truth.
Thanks for joining us.